It's week 2 of Wilds of Eldraine spoilers, and today we're going on an adventure. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron and it's time for another daily dose of Wilds of Eldraine spoilers. So we've moved into week 2 of spoiler season. We got a few more days of spoilers, full set coming out on Friday, and we got some spicy stuff to talk about today, including an adventure that looks a little bit like Reverse Bone Crusher Giant, one of the best ever adventure spells, which means we should probably jump right into it. Start talking about spicy new Wilds of Eldraine cards. Before we do, a couple quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on the latest spoilers throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk some Wilds of Eldraine. First up today, we got a spicy new Selesnya legend in Yenna Redtooth Regent. So 4 mana 4/4, legendary elf noble. Its ability is pay 2 tap it, choose target enchantment you control that doesn't have the same name as another permanent you control. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's not legendary, and if it was an Aura, untap Yenna and then scry 2. So Yenna, for 2 mana, can just copy any enchantment you have on the battlefield, except it can kind of only do it once for each enchantment, since once you have 2 copies of an enchantment on the battlefield, Yenna can't target it anymore. This card is very interesting to me. So in Standard, we already have a pretty good Selesnya Enchantress deck built around Calyx and a bunch of cheap enchantments, and I think Yenna could be an intriguing option there. The downside is, it is 4 mana, it does need to untap, and it's not an enchantment itself, so those are a few votes against it, but its ability is actually very strong. The power of Calyx is it can just copy your enchantments as you attack with it or enchanted creatures. Yenna can do the same thing, but it doesn't even need to attack, and if you're playing an Enchantress deck, you're going to have some really strong enchantments. Like, imagine Michiko's Reign of Truth. You're able to play this, pump something, then copy it with Yenna to pump again. You're probably just one-shotting your opponent at that point, or double Hallowed Haunting is going to close out the game super quick. Even just copying a Spirited Companion is a lot of card advantage, plus the non-legendary part is actually a sneaky upside. Like, one of the best finishers for Selesnya enchantments in Standard is Catilda's Rising Dawn, this aura that gives enchanted creature flying lifelink, pro vampires, and also +X/+X, where X is the number of permanents you control that are enchantments or spirits. Celeste's often coming down and giving a creature like +10/+10 or something, and you just 2-shot your opponent. Yenna can actually just copy that for 2 mana, and then you're just blowing everyone out. So we're gonna have to wait and see. The downside, like I said, is it is kind of slow and it's not an enchantment, but I feel like this card can be very powerful. It has that snowball-y effect. Also worth mentioning that you get a little bonus if you copy auras. If you copy auras, you can use this more than once in a turn. It gets expensive, but for 4 mana, you copy 2 auras. For 6 mana, you can copy 3, although they do have to have different names, so you can't just keep copying the same Audacity again and again and again. But even this seems pretty good, like 2 Audacities, your creature dies, they go to the graveyard, you draw a couple of cards. It works with curses, which are auras. It can work with the land enchantments as ramp, like Blighted Burgeoning. So I think this card, in a minimum, it seems super fun. My guess is, if it does make it an Enchantress in Standard, it's probably like a 1 of or a 2 of type thing, rather than like a 4 of best card in the deck. But I think it's close enough. Its stats are close enough. Its ability is interesting enough that it could see some play there. Once you get back to older formats or Commander, this card gets really wild. So it combos with Doubling Seasons and Primal Vigors and Parallel Lives and Anointed Processions. Like, if you have Yenna out in a Doubling Season, you can Yenna to copy your Doubling Season. That's going to make 2 more Doubling Seasons, so now you have 3 Doubling Seasons, and then next time you Yenna something, you're just gonna make so many copies of it. So snowballs really hard with any token doublers. This is probably the best card for Go Shintai Shrines decks, one of the most popular commanders from last year. Go Shintai of Life's Origins, such a cool card. It's like the ultimate shrine commanders, and players love building around shrines. The problem is all shrines are legendary, so you can only ever have one of them on the battlefield, which is kind of restricting, because a lot of the shrines aren't that good, and you want a lot of them to power each other up, kind of Sliver style almost. Yenna lets you get around that by making non-legendary copies of them, so I feel like this is going to be a new auto-include in any sort of Go Shintai shrine deck, not just to copy your shrines, but to get around the legend rule. As far as being your commander, My guess is this is not as strong as Seth is. Like, one of the downsides of Modern Horizons is some of the cards we get in those sets are so strong that it's very difficult for a card from a standard set to actually beat them out in power level. And I think that's where we're at with Yenna versus Sethis. Like, Sethis is just... it's ridiculous. I don't think you can really make a better Enchantress commander, but that's fine. Yenna's way more interesting, way cooler, and sometimes being a little bit lower powered is actually a good thing in Commander. Sethis is a legit scary commander. When if you sit down to the table with Sethis, you are probably going to be the arch enemy where people are like, okay, we know what Sethis does. It just goes off very easily. It's so cheap, recastable, generates so much card advantage. We pretty much got to deal with the Sethis player. I don't think Yenna is going to bring that same reaction. So if you want to build the, CDH, spikiest, strongest possible Selesnya enchantment deck, you're probably still sticking with Sethis, but Yenna I think is a much more fun option that's a little less powerful, which in lower power play groups is probably good so you're not the arch enemy. Seems like an easy upgrade for some of the Commander Master stuff. Like, we just got this pre-con deck featuring Abzan Enchantress with Anitha and Narcy. Yenna seems designed to upgrade those decks. They just care about the same thing, so if you're playing those decks, throw it in there. Really, you can throw this in any enchantment deck though. In Commander, you get even more value out of the legend rule avoidance. Like, imagine you're playing Karametra. Yenna can let you copy your Karametra, and having 2 Karametras going is going to be so much ramp. Or you're playing a Zika enchantment. You can use this to copy Prismatic Bridge, and 2 Prismatic Bridges each turn is so much free value. So I actually really like this card. My guess is it's kind of like a fringe role player in Standard, but in Commander seems like a really easy inclusion in the 99 of a bunch of different enchantment decks, especially ones like Shrines that really care about getting around the legend rule, plus a nice, more fun, slightly lower powered version of Sethis if you want to build around it as your commander. Speaking of new legends, we got one that I think is mostly designed for Standard, and I think this card might be legit good, in Goddric Cloaked Reveler. So 3 mana 3/3 legendary human noble. It has haste, and it has Celebration, a mechanic that we haven't really talked about a ton. Celebration is, as long as 2 or more non-land permanents enter the battlefield under your control this turn, something happens. In the case of Goddric, it turns into a 4/4 flying dragon, where you can pay 1 to pump all of your dragon creatures +1/+0 until end of turn. So Goddric, ignore the dragon part. Like, yes, you could build like a dragon tribal deck. It does have some value there, but I think this is just like a generically good red aggro card. So in the past, just being a 3 mana 3/3 haster was good enough to see constructed play. Like, Dreadmangler was a constructed card, Fanatica Xenagos. If you go back in Magic's history, like 10 plus years ago, these cards were just kind of very good just based on rate alone. We're no longer in that era. Like, Artie Brokepile was a 3 mana 3/3 haster with some upside, sees no play at all. So just being a 3/3 haster, not going to be enough. But Goddric is not just a 3/3 haster. This is actually a 3/3 haster that is often going to be a way undercosted 4/4 flying haster, and that's the part to be excited about. If you think about 4/4 flying haste in Magic, normally those cards cost 5 mana, so getting one for 3 mana is a huge discount. So if you can build your deck in a way where this is consistently going to be a 4/4 hasty flyer, the card is absurd. It is way above the curve, even historically through Magic, and it doesn't seem that hard to do. So I'm imagining you play this in mono red aggro. On turn 3, if the situation's right, you run it out, smack your opponent for some damage. If the situation's not right, you can wait until turn 4 in Goddric plus a 1-drop, a Swift Spear, a Kimana Faces Kazan, a Phoenix Chick, and all of a sudden you have this 4/4 hasty flyer that's hitting your opponent for a ton of damage out of nowhere. And there's lots of good cards that let you do this every single turn. It seems like Celebration is built to synergize with the roll mechanic. All these roll creatures are putting a body on the battlefield and also putting an aura on the battlefield. So any creature that makes a roll by itself is going to have 2 permanents entering the battlefield, which is going to trigger Celebration. So you play your Goddric, you get in some damage, then you Charming Scoundrel and put a Wicked Roll on something. That's 2 permanents, that triggers Goddric, you hit for 4 in the air again, or Embereth Veteran, or Spiteful Hexmage, or Charmed Clothier. So there's lots of synergies there. And if you want to go back a little further in Standard, there's some really good cards that put 2 permanents on the battlefield. Voldaren Epicure, Blood Tithe Harvester, put good bodies and a blood token. So that's 2 permanents, 4/4 hasting Goddric. Squee Dubious Monarch, play with haste, attack, make the token. That'll be the 2nd permanent. Goddric goes to the air, smash your opponent. Urbos Forge comes down, starts making tokens to trigger Goddric. So I actually think that Goddric is just like a really good standard aggro card. It is legendary, so we'll have to see the exact numbers, like how many can you play in your mono red deck? Is this one of those legends that's so good you can play 4 of them, even though the legend rule's a bit of an issue? I guess you get a little bit of legend rule avoidance, right? Worst case, you can play an additional one just to be a permanent entering the battlefield to help trigger celebration, although that doesn't seem very worth it. But I feel like this card is good enough to definitely have a home in standard, in mono red aggro style decks, in decks that are built around putting multiple permanents into play, like the Rolls or the Bloodtide Harvest or Blood Token things. So I actually think the fact that this can pretty consistently be a 3-mana 4/4 Flying Haster makes this just a really strong standard card. And then I guess if you want to, you can build it as your Dragon Commander or something. Although really this card to me feels designed for standard way more so than a Commander or whatever. Next up, we got an intriguing new adventure card in Heartflame Duelist. So adventure side, 3 mana, instant speed, 3 damage to any target. Its creature side, 2 mana, 3/1 human knight, says instant and sorcery spells you control have lifelink. So this is a very interesting and I think pretty powerful card. So at first glance, it looks a little like Bone Crusher, but it is very much not Bone Crusher Giant. A big part of what made Bone Crusher Giant so strong is the way the spell half curved into the creature half. This was your 2-drop and your 3-drop. On turn 2, you stomp something. Turn 3, you play the Bone Crusher Giant. So this was one card in your hand that just really filled out the bottom end of your curve. Heartflame Duelist is not going to do that because it's kind of reversed. The creature side is 2 mana. The spell side is 3 mana. So it's not going to be your 2-drop and your 3-drop. It can be your 3-drop and then maybe like double 2-drop on turn 4. But regardless, even though this isn't Bone Crusher Giant, I think that's probably a good thing. The original adventures were just some of those generically good cards that I don't think we want to exist in standard. Heartflame Duelist is still a very, very powerful effect. So if you think about this card, its creature half is kind of Soulfire Grandmaster, Radiant Scroll, Wilder, Firesong, and Sunspeaker. There's not many cards in Magic that give your instants and sorceries lifelink, and this can do some really sweet things with like Blasphemous Act or Star of Extinction, where you cast one of these mass damage burn spells and just gain like hundreds of life. So that'd probably be more like a stuffy doll commander plan or against the odds plan, but it is pretty funny. For more competitive play, I think this is just a good card. In standard, I could see mono red decks splashing into white to be kind of like Boros decks to take advantage of this card. Like it's an on-curve creature that can also be a bad lightning strike off the top of your deck. That seems really good in some sort of aggro deck. It's also a human, which is very intriguing. We see white decks in standard that are mostly human-based, thanks to like Coppercoat Vanguard. Heartflame Duelist seems great there. Those decks are very, very creature-heavy. This is another good on-tribe creature, but it's also a removal spell, so could like mono-white human splash a little bit of red to cast the adventure side? I think that's definitely an option, because adventures are just an inherently powerful effect, so even though this isn't Bone Crusher Giant, that's probably a good thing. This is still a very playable card. I actually think this could show up in humans in older formats as well. If you look at humans in like historic or modern or pioneer, the thing is they're so dependent on having a ton of creatures because of Collected Company or Ether Vials. You can't really play a lightning bolt in a deck like that for the most part. Those decks really want to be all creatures. Heartflame Duelist is a way you can play a creature that also is kind of like a really bad lightning bolt. So it gives you a little removal. It gives you some reach. If you get your opponent low and your opponent rasts your board, you can always just Heartflame Duelist spell mode, slash your opponent for the last 3 points of damage. So I think this is a sneaky way to get a spell into your human deck that can't really normally afford to play spells. So Heartflame Duelist, I think this is one of the better constructed cards from this set. Yes, it's not Bone Crusher Giant, but I think that's a good thing. It's got 2 relevant creature types. Both sides are on curve enough to be good, and I think this card is going to see a lot of play in standard and maybe a bit in older formats as well. We also got a pretty interesting green bomb in Gruff Triplets. So Gruff Triplets, 3 and triple green, so 6 total mana for 3/3 with trample, except it says when it enters the battlefield, if it isn't a token, create 2 tokens that are copies of it. So for 6 mana, you're going to get 3 Gruff Triplets, so 3 3/3s with trample, and then it says when Gruff Triplets dies, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to its power on each creature you control named Gruff Triplets. So here's how this actually works. So 6 mana you play this, you get 3 3/3s with trample. One of them dies, you're going to put 3 +1/+1 counters on the other 2. So then you're going to have 2 6/6s with trample. And then when one of those dies, its counters are going to go on the last remaining Gruff Triplets, and you're going to have a 12/12 with trample. That's a lot of power and toughness. Of course, that plan all falls apart if your opponent just farewells you or sunfalls you, then they all go away and you don't get any of the cool counter shenanigans. But this card adds a lot of power and toughness to the battlefield. So, 3/3/3s for 6 mana. Probably not going to make it in standard. Like, we have Rebuild the City. 6 mana, copy a land you control. You get 3/3/3 copies of them. That's not something that's seen any play. Feral Incantation, that's not a card that ever saw play, even with Convoke. So just 3/3/3s isn't enough. Another comparison, like Tovolar's Huntmaster, that comes down and just immediately makes 10 power. A 6/6 into 2/2s, and then you can maybe get more Grave Titan style if it gets to attack and flips and all that stuff. And that doesn't really see play. So as just a base level card, this wouldn't be something to be excited about, but the fact that those counters move around as your Gruff Triplets die and grow the other ones, that's what makes this really scary. If this is 2 6/6s with Trample, that's kind of a really exciting card, and all that requires is one of the 3 to die, and we have some token synergies in Standard. So my first thought in Standard was, okay, you can play this in like King Darien to make your tokens indestructible, maybe with Kaya Geist Hunter. When you're doubling this up and getting 5 total Gruff Triplets, then it gets really, really wild. So maybe there's something we could do there. It could just be a generically good green Stompy card, although we haven't really seen green Stompy be a deck yet. Could also work in a +1/+1 counter theme deck. Like, Ozolith is going to add even more counters to your stuff. As your Gruff Triplets die, your Botanical Brawler is going to get super huge. So it could be a top end for a deck like that as well. Plus, remember, we're going into a standard that likes things to be sacrificed, things to bargain, things to casualty. So Gruff Triplets, natural fit there as well. You play this, you get 3/3/3s, you sack one to Thunderous Debut, you turn your other 2 into 6/6s, and you get to dig through your deck, put a couple creatures into play. So there's a lot of synergies here. So I think this is a card that, when I first read it, I was like, oh, this looks like an intro pack rare. Sure, it has a bunch of bodies, but I could see this fronting an intro pack back in the day. But I think it's actually way more than that, just because of that last ability, where the counters go on the other copies as it dies. Once you get back to older formats, this card can get absolutely wild. This is like best friends with Doubling Season. Like, imagine you play Doubling Season, and then the next turn you Gruff Triplets, you're going to get 5 of them, the original, and then 4 token copies. And then one of them dies, you're not going to get 3 counters on everything, you're going to get 6 counters on everything. So your first Gruff Triplets dies, all your other ones are going to be 9/9s. And then if one of those dies, oh my god, you're going to put so many counters. You're going to put 9 counters, but that's doubled to 18 on the other ones. So then you're going to have, what, 3? I don't even know. I can't count that high. 27 27s? Like, it just snowballs out of control absolutely ridiculously. And remember, Doubling Season coming to Arena for the first time. So I don't know if this is like a good or competitive plan, but I'd be down with trying some Doubling Season into Gruff Triplets in Historic. The other way you could do this is just sacrifice synergies. So you can play a dedicated sack deck, but it works even better with something like Berserk, because remember, when the Gruff Triplet dies, it puts counters on the other ones equal to its power. So if you do something like Berserk, for 1 mana you double the creature's power, and then you had a sack at the end of turn, so you can Berserk it, double the power up to 6, and get in some damage, and then when it dies, you're going to put 6 counters on all the other ones. So Gruff Triplets, I really actually kind of like this card. At first I thought it was going to be like kind of bad and man, just as like weird Timmy card that wouldn't really make it, but the more I think about what this card can do and the synergies it has, the more I actually become pretty excited about building around it, because it just puts so much power on the battlefield. Although, like I said back in the beginning, it does have that downside that it's really soft to Wraths, and right now in Standard, with like Farewell, Sunfall being so heavily played, that is a big drawback, combined with the fact that like green just is the worst color in Standard. So those are the reasons to be skeptical of this card, but still, it adds so much power and so many bodies to the battlefield. I think we gotta be able to figure out something sweet to do with it. Next up, we got a new white enchantment that I'm pretty sure is gonna make for a brand new archetype in Standard, in a Tale for the Ages. So a Tale for the Ages, 2 mana, white enchantment, says enchanted creatures you control get +2/+2. So as soon as I saw this, it made me think of Tempered Steel. Tempered Steel, 3 mana white enchantment, says artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. And if you've been playing Magic for a while, you might remember that Tempered Steel was actually a really good card back in its day. It created several very competitive, like pro tour level decks where you just like play a bunch of cheap artifact creatures like Ornithopter and Midnight and Steel Overseal, drop his Tempered Steel or 2, and all of a sudden your Ornithopters like hitting for 4 and you just win the game out of nowhere. So a Tale for the Ages, obviously, it has a drawback, which it only works with enchanted creatures, which is a little bit harder to achieve than just playing artifact creatures. And honestly, most of the existing Auras decks that we have are not going to want this. If you think about Aura decks across formats, they're mostly Voltron-style Boggles decks, where you're trying to get 1 or 2 big creatures, a Core Spirit Dancer, a Slippery Boggle, a Light Paws, and put all of your auras on and turn it into a game-ending threat. In a deck like that, a Tale for the Ages is downright bad. Like, it's giving your single Slippery Boggle +2/+2. There's enchantments that do way more than that, like a single Ethereal Armor, all that glitters, is going to offer way more value. A Tale for the Ages is for a very different style of Auras deck, but it's a style that I think we're going to see in Standard thanks to the role mechanic. So what a Tale for the Ages wants is a go-wide Auras deck, which honestly we've never really seen before, but I think we can see in Standard thanks to roles. So the role mechanic has all these like somewhat efficient creatures that just happen to put auras on your stuff. So take Spiteful Hexmage for example. It looks like a pretty bad card because it comes down for a 1 mana. You got to put a Curse Roll on it, so it's a 1 mana 1/1, but it has an aura on it. If you're playing a Tale for the Ages, this card actually becomes really strong. You play it on turn 1, next turn you drop a Tale for the Ages, you have a 3/3 for 1. And we have many other similar cards, like a Charming Scoundrel can put a Wicked Roll on something, Spellbook Vendor puts rolls on things, Cursed Courtier, Conceited Witch. So that's where I'm envisioning a Tale for the Ages to really shine. A deck that's just trying to drop as many of these role creatures as possible, and then use a Tale for the Ages to pump them, similar to how we saw Tempered Steel work with artifact creatures. So I really love the design of this card, and I gotta say, I really love the design of this set so far. I think we're seeing Wizards really heading in a new direction with this set, where we're seeing cards that are very, very strong in specific archetypes, rather than cards that are very strong in every archetype. Like a Tale for the Ages, if you're playing a role deck and most of your creatures are just incidentally putting enchantments on your creatures and auras on your creatures, this is a legit bomb, the foundation of a potentially competitive Standard deck. On the other hand, in every other archetype, this card is downright useless. You would never play it, and that even goes to other Auras archetypes, like we were talking about, like Boggles. Like, you wouldn't even play this in a Boggles style Auras deck. So very powerful in a specific archetype, compared to where we have been, which is cards that are just really powerful in every archetype, like Shieldred or Fable of the Mirror Breaker. And I think Standard is going to be way, way better if we have a bunch of these strong archetypal cards, rather than generically strong cards. The only problem is, we still got all those generically strong cards in the format. Like, we still have Shieldred and these just like best in every deck cards. So I think a year from now, 2 years from now, we're going to really see this pay off. And if things go to plan, Standard is going to be really, really awesome if Wizards continues down this path. Does it survive long enough to get us there, though, until Shieldred rotates out of the format? These other generically good cards rotate out of the format? That's going to be the question. So I gotta say, shout out to Wizards, because I think the design of this set is super awesome, and I love where they're going with Standard. I'm just a little worried that we're getting there too slowly, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. We also got a saga I missed a couple days ago in the Apprentice's Folly. So 4 mana Izzet Saga. Its first 2 lore counters are choose target non-token creature you control that doesn't have the same name as a token you control. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it isn't legendary. It is a reflection in addition to its other types, and it has haste. So essentially, 4 mana, play this, get a token copy of one of your things. The next turn, get a token copy of another one of your things. The problem is the last lore counter is sacrifice all reflections you control. So you're going to lose the token copy it makes after 2 turns. This card really intrigues me. So compared to other token copiers, Ericus's Vile Duplication, Cackling Counterpart, Quasi-Duplicate, this is just way more efficient. For 4 mana, you're getting 2 token copies of different creatures you control. They even have haste, they're reflections, which I guess is a nice callback to Spirit Mirror. The problem is they're temporary. So how do you use these temporary token copies? And I think there's really 2 plans for this card. The first is you copy things that offer so much value, you don't care that the token's temporary. Like, let's say you play an Atali, and the next turn you play Apprentice's Folly and copy Atali and get a hasty Atali and its ETB trigger again. what do you care that Ateli's going to go away in 2 turns? You're probably just winning that turn. Same with like Atraxa or even Sanctuary Warden. You just draw so many cards, generate so much value, thanks to Hasty deal a bunch of damage. So this is kind of the Mull Drifter technique, where you're just like, okay, my things aren't going to live, but their ETBs or stats are so good that even though they only last for a couple of turns, it's still totally worth it. There's also another very sneaky way to play this card, which is the bargain mechanic. So you remember bargain? It wants you to sack an artifact, enchantment, or token you control to get an extra bonus when you cast the spell. So the idea here is you play Apprentice Folly, use the first 2 lore counters, but then before you get to the 3rd one, you bargain away the Apprentice's Folly. If you do that, you never get to this sacrifice all your reflections mode, and you get to keep those token copies forever. When this is 4 mana, copy your 2 best creatures as tokens and keep them forever, and they have haste and they're not legendary because you sacked it to Farsight Ritual or Beseech Emir or whatever. Then this card is really, really strong. And this goes back to what we were talking about before with like Farsight Ritual. Farsight Ritual, it looks like Bad Memory Deluge, and most of the time it is Bad Memory Deluge. But what if you're trying to sack your Apprentice's Folly? Then all of a sudden this is a really good Memory Deluge in that specific deck. So I hope we keep seeing more of this design. As far as Commander is concerned, I guess you could play this in any big token deck that's in the colors, although I think the most obvious home is Berticlad. This seems like an amazing card for Berticlad. Berticlad just wants you to be able to make token copies of your best, biggest things, because then Berticlad can turn all of your other stuff into that on your combat on your turn. So Apprentice's Folly is a way to do that 2 turns in a row. Make a token copy of your best creature, go to combat, Berticlad's going to give you a ton of those, maybe you win the game. If you don't win the game, you do it again the next turn. So I think that's the most obvious home, although like Gimbal or Magus of the Red could use it as well. Honestly though, like, Izzet's one of the weirdest token colors, so I don't know how many decks there are for this, but if you're an Izzet deck that cares about big tokens, this seems like an easy inclusion there as well. So the Apprentice's Folly, I like this card. It's not generically good. You're not going to play it in most decks, but if you build around it, it does offer a lot of value thanks to those first 2 lore counters. We also got a new Selesnya adventure rare in Pollen-Shield Hare / hair raising. Watsy and their puns. So Pollen-Shield Hare, its adventure side, 1 mana sorcery, that's the hair-raising part. Target creature you control gains vigilance and gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. So a pump spell that can be really powerful, but mostly good in the late game. And then Pollen-Shield Hare, 2 mana 2/2, creature tokens you control get +1/+1. So a 2 mana lord for creature tokens. So how good is Pollen-Shield Hare? It's essentially like an appeal to authority mixed with an intangible virtue on a body, which being on a body, I guess, is good or bad. Like, it is a body on the battlefield, so in theory you can attack with it. The downside is it does die to creature removal. If you get Wrath, you're going to lose your Anthem along with the rest of your board. So this card, I think, is intriguing to me. The most interesting part is this is a really cheap adventure. I mean, the sorcery spell's 1 mana, the creature's only 2 mana, but it's one that you don't really want to play in the early game. This is actually kind of like a late game finisher almost, where what you want to do is make a big board full of tokens, and then in the same turn, use Hair Raising to pump something, and then play Pollen-Shield Hare to pump everything, and hopefully just one-shot kill your opponent. So we have some pieces to make a deck like this work in Standard. We have a lot of support for tokens. We haven't really seen them take off. It's a little bit punishing in a world where there's a lot of Farewells and Sunfalls, but we have King Darien as another way to pump the team and also to protect our tokens. Awaken the Wood makes a ton of tokens. Join the Dance makes a ton of tokens. So maybe we see some sort of green-white or Naya token deck develop with Pollen-Shield Hare being a finisher in it. It also interacts really well with Trample. The one downside of Hair Raising is it doesn't actually give the thing you target vigilance. So let's say you make 10 tokens and you cast your Hair Raising to make some creature absolutely massive one-shot kill threat. In theory, your opponent can just put a random 1/1 in front of it and it's not going to deal any damage. So it synergizes really well with Trample. Like Cabretti Charm can give your entire team +1/+1 in Trample. Maybe there's a late game plan where you just make a bunch of tokens and then in the same turn for like 6 mana, you like Cabretti Charm to pump your team, and then you Hair Raising to pump a creature, then you Pollen-Shield Hare to pump your team and just kill your opponent on the spot. It's also interesting with Invoke the Ancients, which can just make these big trampling tokens. In Invoke the Ancients, it is a really strong card. Every time we end up playing it, I feel like, wow, this card really should see more play in Standard. So as far as Standard is concerned, to me this just feels like a solid support piece. Not going to be an all-star or anything, but it does a bunch of little things. It's technically card advantage is 2 cards in 1 and could be good enough for some sort of token deck. And I definitely want to revisit token with these new pieces and see if it can actually work in standard. As far as Commander is concerned, tokens are a really popular theme, and I don't think that I'd play Pollen-Shield Hare in every token deck. I'm kind of like meh-ish on it. Like, I'm not super excited about a random Lord. The pump spell, like I said, doesn't give trample, so I don't think I would run this in just any token deck. I don't think this is a new staple or anything like that, but I do think this card is really, really good in specific token decks, which are primarily token decks where your commander in one way or another either has trample or gives stuff trample. So the first thing I thought of is Kadria, Caller of the Small. Seems absolutely perfect for this card. It even makes rabbit tokens. It's almost like Wizards designed these 2 cards to see play together. So Kadria, 3 mana 3/3 trample. When it deals combat damage to a player, for each token you control, you create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token. So Kadria is a commander that makes lots of tokens. It also wants to be as big as possible, and it has trample. So in a Kadria deck, Pollen-Shield Hare seems absolutely ridiculous. You make some tokens, you use the hair raising on Kadria, you hit someone, you make like 10 or 20 tokens, and then you have all these rabbits that you can play Pollen-Shield Hare and pump all those to close out the game the next turn. Also really sweet with like Galton Mavrin, another commander that has trample and can make a ton of tokens. You can potentially just one-shot someone with commander damage. Also seems pretty good with Jetmir. Jetmir, I know, like, gives everything trample and double strike, but still, like, you make a bunch of bodies, then you use hair raising on the Jetmir, you probably just one-shot kill someone, Voltron style, and then maybe kill someone else by going wide with the rest of your board. So in those decks, I think Pollen-Shield Hare is actually a really good addition in Commander as well. So Pollen-Shield Hare, it's a weird card. It's just weird because it's so cheap and efficient that it makes you think, okay, this is like an early gameplay I need to get on the battlefield, when really it's like a 2-drop that is going to be at its best on turn 7 or something rather than on turn 2, but in the right deck with a bunch of tokens can actually be a pretty strong card. In the world of lower rarity cards, got a couple worth mentioning individually. Solitary Sanctuary, 3-mana enchantment. When it ETBs, tap target creature an opponent controls, put a stun counter on it so it doesn't untap the next turn. And then whenever you tap an untapped creature an opponent controls, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So this card, probably not good enough for standard, although I think it's worth mentioning just because of Hilda, and we've been talking about needing good ways to tap stuff to make Hilda work. So if your deck is built around tapping your opponent's untapped creatures, this is kind of intriguing. Like, you get a Hilda trigger, you put counters on things to grow your team, so worth keeping in mind specifically for the Hilda archetype. We also got Up the Beanstalk, a 2-mana enchantment that when it ETBs, or whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, you draw a card. I think this card might actually be really good. So it's a 2-mana enchantment that cantrips, so by itself it can't be that bad. And then whenever you cast an expensive thing, you get to draw another card. It reminds me a little bit of Garruk's Uprising. Garruk's Uprising specifically cares about creatures with power 4 or greater. Up a Beanstalk doesn't have the creature restriction, but it is a little bit more expensive. You need 5 mana value stuff, which is going to be more costlier than 4 power creatures. But if your deck has an enchantment theme, is built around a bunch of big spells, this seems like it could be a pretty consistent source of card advantage. Plus, again, just like being 2 mana and cantripping when it enters the battlefield makes the opportunity cost of putting in this in your deck pretty low. Worst case, it's 2 mana, trigger all your constellation stuff, all your enchantment stuff, add an enchantment to the battlefield for Hallowed Haunting or whatever, Calyx or whatever, and then also maybe draw some cards later in the game. Of course, we also got a bunch of draft chaff. Some of it's not horrible, but mostly stuff that shouldn't have a huge impact on Constructed. But like usual, you can check that all out over at MTGPreviews.com. Wrapping things up today, we have 2 new Enchanted Tales. Both are brand new to Arena, I believe. The first one, Dark Tutelage, not very good. It's essentially Dark Confidant, but on a 3-mana enchantment. Worth noting, it's bumped down to uncommon for, I believe, the first time. This was originally rare back in like core set 2012 or something, like a decade ago. So it's a fine card, but this was a card I remember people being really hyped about as like a Dark Confidant replacement, and it just ended up being not all that good. And on Arena, where you already have like Phyrexian Arena and a bunch of other similar options, the One Ring, I would be surprised if if this saw a meaningful amount of play anywhere. We also got Karmic Justice, a 3-mana enchantment that's whenever a spell or an ability opponent controls destroys a non-creature permanent you control, you get to destroy a target permanent that opponent controls. Worth noting, it does not say non-land permanent, so this is basically like, don't target my stuff or I'm gonna wreck you. The downside is it only works with non-creature permanents, so your opponent is free to kill your creatures, but if you're playing like a historic brawl deck, let's say, that's built around enchantments or artifacts, other non-creature permanents, planeswalkers, your opponent's probably gonna have to kill them eventually, and if they do, Karmic Justice is actually very, very punishing. And one of the upsides of Karmic Justice is it counts itself. So worst case, you play this, and if your opponent's like, oh no, I can't let this stay on the battlefield, I gotta kill it, they spend a removal spell on it, and then you get to blow up their best thing along the way as well, and you can blow up any permanent your opponent controls. So we expect this to be a fairly popular historic brawl option, although I would be kind of surprised if it saw play in 60 card formats. It would take a pretty specific deck to make this work in a format like historic. But anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Wilds of Eldraine spoilers for today. So let me know what you think. What are you most hyped about from the day? Let me know in the comments, and I'll be back tomorrow with more Wilds of Eldraine spoilers. So until then, have a lovely day, everyone, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, you can check out yesterday's spoiler video here, or maybe the video where we talked about the plays that actually forced Wizards to change the very rules of Magic.